I'm sure you've heard it all before. People nowadays are just too sensitive. We were just fine without all these different labels back in the day. Well, underneath all of those statements is the quiet assumption that there is one normal way to be, to exist, to see the world, um, and everything else is a problem to be fixed. So, in this video, I really want to talk about why difference is not deviance and how actually embracing these differences is the key to growth. Whether that's professional growth, personal growth, growth as a leader, we need to learn to be able to accept differences and not immediately shun them. So, why do we as humans have different ways of viewing the world or of seeing a situation? Well, it's because we all see things through our own personal worldviews. You might be asking, what's a worldview? A worldview is basically a set of mental lenses that we see through and that we use to interpret the world around us. It's the map that you use to make sense of reality. It's how you decide what's normal and what's problematic. Um, those worldviews are created over time and they are informed and molded by our family, our faith, our school, our communities, all of our traumas, social media, all of these things come together to inform our worldview. Different cultures often have different worldviews, and there are these huge big paradigms that we kind of see shift throughout history of a general worldview. Like obviously, if different cultures and countries and everybody's having a different one, there's not going to be one that is true for everybody. But over time, different worldviews have manifested. For example, for most of history, humans tended towards something that we call positivism. Now, positivism is a way of seeing the world that says that only the things that we can observe, measure, or test count as real knowledge. It's the mindset that says seeing or measuring is believing, and that the best way to understand reality is to treat everything like a science experiment. As we begin to learn more about the world, the universe, and each other as human beings, as well as the other beings that we, interact with on this planet, um, our understanding changes, expands, and general worldviews evolve. Now, some people will adopt the new worldview as it evolves, and others kind of stick to what came before. Again, not every worldview has to have a name like positivism. There are plenty of names for different paradigms and worldviews that um, kind of serve as these lenses. But again, we all have our own individual worldviews as well, that are informed by the larger worldview, but not necessarily a part of it. And so, even from one generation to the next, and especially with the advance of technology, attitudes and knowledge about various topics, groups, and ideas change and evolve and get um, wrapped up into the new evolution of the general worldview. So, like I said, we each have our own individual worldview, which is usually influenced by the dominant worldview, whether we agree with it or not. Even if we don't agree with the general worldview, for example, the general worldview might be that we should have more tolerance for people who are different from us, right? But you might disagree with that. You do not, obviously, not everyone agrees with that statement. And so, while something can be a general worldview, we still have to think about how our worldview interacts with that general worldview. And a lot of the thing about a worldview is our individual experiences color that worldview. Like I said, it's our family, it's our friends, our school, the things that we go through, again, the traumas that we experience. Those are things that we experience that color our worldview. That's the reason why our worldviews are so hard to shake, because no matter what you know intellectually, if your experience is different, it's hard to shake that. If you've gotten robbed 3 times and every time the person who robbed you had blue eyes, you might know intellectually that just because someone has blue eyes doesn't mean that they're going to rob you. But your brain might, pick up that shortcut and be a little bit more wary when interacting with somebody with blue eyes. And that colors your interaction with that person. It colors how you experience them. It colors how they experience you. And there's just so much that goes into that. And that's why it's important to be aware of your worldview. Your worldview could be wrong, or maybe not appropriate for the situation that you're in. We have to be able to examine our worldviews. We have to know what our worldview is and examine it for our individual biases. It's really important. We need to be able to both communicate our experiences as they relate to our worldview, but we also need to hold space for the idea that our experiences are outliers or are even colored by our worldview itself. So again, if I am highly suspicious of people with blue eyes, even though I'm meeting a bunch of people with blue eyes and no one has done anything to me, I might show up a certain way, which again, then they might interpret me a certain way. Like I might show up as fearful, I might show up as aggressive. There's a lot of different ways, and that's going to color how they approach me, those folks with the blue eyes. And so I have to be able to say, okay, I had these experiences, but let me be open to the idea that this is not all that there is. People know when they're being prematurely and unfairly judged, and they're not going to take kindly to it. And so again, I don't think some of us understand how what we think like shows up sometimes before we even say a word. And you might have negative. So, for example, um, another example, I know a lot of women who say that they just can't have relationships with women, not really friendships. Like it's so hard. Women are so catty. Like all of these things, right? Now, that's not my worldview. And my worldview, women are awesome. People are awesome to a certain extent. But, and have I had negative experiences with women? Yes, plenty, 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 so many. But I've also had so many great, amazing, fulfilling, um, gratifying like experiences and interactions with women that I personally, again, this is me, could never say that I I can't be friends with women. And it's hard for me, honestly, to understand those who say that. In my worldview, that worldview is a little bit myopic. But on one hand, while I can't begrudge them the experiences that they had, like I can't say you didn't have those experiences, and I also can't say that you had those experiences, but they shouldn't have any effect on you and your life. At the same time, I can also ask them to hold space for the idea that not all women are the way that they're describing, and to consider the fact that because they think of women in that way, when they show up to a room full of women, they might be giving off, you know, unapproachable, unfriendly vibes before they even get to say a word. But then if those women in that new group don't understand why they're getting that vibe, they might be a little bit off put themselves. And again, it's just going to be a big cycle. We also tend to collect and keep information that confirms our worldview while we go ahead and dismiss information that conflicts with it. That is something that humans tend to do. Again, our brains are wired to make shortcuts, and we have to make sure that the shortcuts our brains are engaging in do not negatively impact the way that we show up in the spaces that we go into. This is why a very honest inventory of the foundations or origins of a particular thought or belief is so important. When you get new information, keeping in mind, thinking about the validity of that information, etc. When you get new information, your mind should change. I think sometimes we have this idea that, nope, this is what I believe and no one can change my mind. That is the quickest way to stagnate, the quickest way to become obsolete, quite frankly, in a lot of different ways. Okay, so that's a general overview on worldviews and how different worldviews form. And that's why I say difference is not deviance. Essentially, if there's no single universal correct way of seeing the world, and that is true according to my worldview, then there is no neutral standard for what's normal. That means that difference isn't deviance, it's just difference. It's just not the same. Like, there's not a whole lot of ways to say that, but it's just not a deviation from normal. It's just different than what you're used to. We are generally socialized to believe that the people who see the world differently from us are barbaric or too soft or too cold or too emotional or whatever it is. And that's those ideas, those sentiments are not about truth, they're about power. It's those ideas center one worldview as the standard and pushes everything else out to the fringes. It marginalizes other ways of thinking without even considering whether they're valid or not. So, something that I heard once and I really love because it kind of sums everything up is this: if you are always right, you're wrong. Period. If you are convinced that you are always right and nobody else has anything of value to contribute to your thought process, you are wrong. If you're overly convicted all the time, you shut down your capacity to learn and to grow, and you stifle yourself, and you can also stifle everybody else around you. When you think about a lot of the different worldviews and the dominant and really defined worldviews over time, whether that's heroism or rationalism, positivism, romanticism, existentialism, postmodernism, you have to consider what each of those worldviews mean. Each of these worldviews carries a story about what matters. Is it power, logic, data, passion, freedom, or everyone's different narratives? Think about it like this: that argument that happened when you were at work and you were in that policy meeting, the fight wasn't about policy. It was a clash of different worldviews. There's someone who is operating from the idea that the rules keep us safe. There's someone operating from the worldview that people in relationships come first no matter what. There's someone there that's operating from the idea that data is king and nothing else matters. If you don't recognize that, you end up trying to prove people wrong instead of understanding the story underneath everyone's worldview. The thing is, all of these worldviews aren't wrong. They are all shedding light on a different aspect of this issue. We should be listening to those worldviews and learning from them and not silencing them. We can drastically deepen our understanding of different situations and different ideas if we stop trying to fight people that think differently than us. Now, is it a compromise to get to a solution that everybody agrees to? Yes. Compromise and all of that is a part of the puzzle. It's all a part of what we do as humanity. Like, we all can't get our way all the time. We should really start to think about the differences in the way we think from other people as, I don't think that made any sense. We should start to think about all of those differences of thought as a different lens for the same situation. Once we apply all of those lenses, then we can see the situation totally and for what it is, and we can draft up a solution that doesn't miss any of those points. So while I was thinking through this video, I jotted down a note and I just have it here, so I'm going to read it. In order to collaborate and make progress, we have to learn to work with people who think differently than us and embrace paradox instead of trying to solve it. So that's also a new word. Not a new word, but a new word in this video, a new concept, the paradox. What is a paradox? A paradox is essentially when two things that seem opposite are true at the same time. So on one hand, you can believe that there's no single right way to see the world and still believe that some behaviors and some worldviews are harmful and unacceptable. You can honor both community and individual expression. You can care about efficiency and still slow down for relationships. We have to be able to hold the tension between these things and not to make a binary choice between one or the other. You're going to alienate people. First of all, a certain amount of disagreement is always going to be a thing. It's always going to be present. But if we can hold the tension of those paradoxes, um, we can again come up with solutions to a problem that take both things into account. Where is there a compromise? Yes. But is everyone being addressed and no one's being ignored? Also, yes. This is why context is always important. It tells us where to lean more into tradition or more into innovation, or vice versa. It really guides us into navigating the tension. So, in dealing with paradoxes, the goal isn't to pick one side forever. It is to constantly be navigating that tension and using context to do it. And a lot of the times, people are lazy and they don't want to get into that contextual back and forth. Um, but the reality of the situation is, we cannot help people unless we understand who they are, where they are, and how they're situated in their context. So there are a few ways that we can begin to embrace difference instead of trying to solve for it. These are some things that I do, some things that I've seen done. I'm not going to take too much time, but I didn't also want to leave this video with like no support, no help. So one thing that you can do is to practice reflective non-judgment. So this is something a lot of indigenous research paradigms include reflective non-judgment. This means listening to what's being said without immediately giving it a value. Hearing an idea and not immediately going to, that's stupid or that's wrong, we can't do that, or, don't pass a judgment on it. Hear it, just hear it. Think about it without giving it that negative qualifier. It's not about giving up your discernment. You want to postpone it a little bit. You're listening for the context, for the story, and for the meaning before you get towards your solution, before you start to think about how to solve. And one way to do this tangibly is when someone shares a thought or a worldview that you dislike, a perspective that you do not vibe with, take a breath, think to yourself, and ask, what kind of life experiences must this person have had that they feel this way? And then respond to that person with a clarifying question as opposed to a critique. And I'm not saying that some people don't deserve critique off the bat. There is some level of discernment here. You do have to, like, you can't just accept a hateful and vitriolic, perspective just for the sake of entertaining it. No. Um, no. But you do want to clarify before you critique, because if you clarify, you might find out that your critique is not necessary. So, another thing that you can do is to expand your worldview literacy. And so that is just really learning to name or recognize different kinds of worldviews. Again, there's so many different names. I named like 6 of them earlier. There's just so many different worldviews that you can subscribe to. Um, and you want to recognize the different ways of knowing things. Again, like I said, for positivism, it's only what's measured and what you can see and what you can count. That's all that matters. Then there are other worldviews that say, actually, no, context matters, emotions matter. You can't really measure emotions, but they are important. A lot of people would disagree with that, but obviously I don't. I think that emotions and like this kind of idea of logic and rationality are complements and they are not exclusionary toward one another. For example, though, some worldviews value dreams and intuition and stories the same way they value what you can see and what you can touch and what you can smell. Um, those dreams, intuition, those are valuable and valid ways of gaining knowledge in some worldviews. And some people, if you heard that and you thought that's stupid, go back, practice some reflective non-judgment, and think about why that might be the case. And one thing, or a couple of things you can do to combat this is you can read and listen wisely. Indigenous scholars, read things that are meant for people different than you. Understand different worldviews, understand where they're coming from. And again, you don't have to adopt that worldview, but understanding it will help a lot. Another thing that we can do to really embrace differences is to normalize the unlearning process. Again, our worldviews are shaped by a lot of the things that we've experienced and learned over the course of our lives. And we have to be able to unlearn some of those things. We need to ask ourselves, where might I be off here? What did I inherit that I've never actually examined? How much of what I think is just because that's what my parents or my grandparents or my family in general, my community, that was what they believed. And I've never even thought about why I believe this thing. Think about why you believe things. Examine your beliefs and thoughts. Be open to the idea that you might be the one in the wrong, or you might need to expand your horizons. There's nothing wrong with that. There is no shame in being wrong unless you then continue to be wrong because you can't adapt. Period. It's disgusting to watch people dig down into their wrongness simply because they don't want to admit that they held a wrong belief, or that their grandmother was mistaken when she told them this thing, or that, my mom's worldview was detrimental about this thing. There were things I had to unlearn because that's just how I grew up. And I was fine to unlearn them because learning the new thing is the one of the keys to my next step, to my next level. Like, how do you really think you grow if you don't incorporate new thoughts and ideas? Like, what is growth then? Is it just an enhancing of your current ideas? Or is it you challenging them? Because you can challenge your ideas and still come back to the same idea, but at least now your stalwartness in that idea is a little bit more valid because at least you examined it. Another thing that you can do is just to leave space or specifically design spaces for multiple truths. And I think this seems like, ooh, woo woo. Honestly, what it looks like, for example, is in a meeting, introducing the topic that you want to discuss, and then having everybody share a story from their own experience about that topic. That way you're getting a lot of different people's ideas, you're getting a lot of different worldviews, a lot of different perspectives, and you're not forcing everything to fit to one narrative. You're not forcing everybody to feel the same way or to think the same way, or to think that if they don't think that same way that something's wrong. Everybody's invited to share their story. Everybody's story is valid and everybody's story can be learned from. That's how you can design a space for multiple truths without sacrificing anything. Okay, so I'm going to keep saying it, or I have kept saying it. But if you take anything from this video, please, please, please take the idea the difference is not deviance. There's no cosmic HR manual that's telling us what's right, what's wrong, what's normal. There's no default setting for humanity. And people who think differently from you are not glitches in the system. They just are people with different worldviews, different maps of how to see reality. Some worldviews do produce harm and they need to be challenged. But the way to challenge harm cannot be by pretending that our lens is the only one that exists or it's the only one that is valid. Otherwise, we become the thing that we're fighting. Over the course of my life and especially my professional journey, the leaders that I trust most are the ones who are willing to say, I might be wrong. Can somebody help me out? What am I missing? Like, they know that they're responsible not just for the decisions that they're being made, but for learning and for how those decisions affect the people and the processes around them. So, I would like to invite you to do three things. One, notice where you've been taught to see difference as dangerous. Two, practice holding paradox instead of rushing to pick sides. And three, commit to some tangible practice this week, whether that's unlearning, whether that's worldview literacy, reflective non-judgment, whatever it is, practice one of them. Just pick it up and see how things might change for you. Because if we can stop treating our differences as something to erase or to fix and start treating them as information, as relationships, as possibilities, that's where the real growth, real justice, and real leadership really live. Um, so, yeah, I don't know if any of that resonated with you. Definitely let me know in the comments below. Talk about how you embrace paradox. Do you embrace paradox? What's that journey been like? If you have learned to kind of um, embrace difference, like have you always been that way? Did you have to learn that? Like, talk to me about your stories in the comments because I would love to hear them and talk to each other. Um, Definitely share if you feel like somebody could use this, not as shade, but as, just a reflection point. And of course, give me a like if something here resonated with you. Um, I have a tendency to ramble at the end of my videos, and so I'm going to try not to do that. I'm going to cut it off here and just say, I will catch you all in the next one. Bye.